Hi, welcome to Unlocking Secrets for Women. I'm your host, Candace Newton, and I'm here with my guest, Kamal Dhillon, who's written an amazing book called Black and Blue Sari. You can purchase her book, Black and Blue Sari, on her website at www.blackandbluesari, and that's and is spelled A-N-D, and Sari is SARI.com. Welcome to Unlocking Secrets for Women, Kamal.
Thank you, Candace.
It's really great to have you here in my kitchen.
Yes, beautiful kitchen.
Girl talk.
Girl talk. Yes, yes.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. And, I've known you for a number of years and watched you go through the process of verbalizing your desire to write your book, looking for the support to write your book, and then eventually seeing this product. I actually saw you on a local television show in December where you had been successful at writing your book, and we're discussing it. And I was so thrilled. I contacted you and said, We've got to talk. And I was really happy to see your progress on it. As you know, I just want to have a really honest conversation with you about this book, its impact on me personally when I read it, even though I knew your story. I couldn't put this book down. I couldn't put it down because I experienced so many emotions while I was reading it, and I already knew your story, but it was written so well. It pulled me in. I couldn't get out of it. I would have to force myself to put it down. The first thing I want to ask you is, are you a professional writer? Have you ever done previous writing before?
No, not at all. In fact, that's why, it took me a long time to write, because not only was I going to relive everything that I had gone through in the 12 and a half years of torture, but I thought, I'm not a writer. I'm not even a talker. And how am I going to express myself? Because I wasn't allowed to express myself. But it's amazing when you start to put down your thoughts on paper, how it flows. And I knew my story. And so to have a final thing, come together in a way that it explored not just the abuse but the culture, and why we stay, why we take all this, so many questions that I was hoping to answer. So I'm glad to hear that you liked it. And
oh yeah, I didn't like what I was reading, because it's very difficult to read this stuff. And I think for people that haven't been exposed to domestic violence, that have lived a pretty pristine kind of life, this could be quite shocking and distressful, but it shouldn't stop them from facing reality.
Yeah, and that's exactly true, because if you haven't faced it, how do you know your children may not? How do you know your loved ones may not? So this book is really to prepare someone who hasn't been through it, and for those who are in it, to let them know that they're not alone and there is hope for them.
So when I think about this book and I think about you writing, can you just walk me through the very first time you decide you're going to sit down at the computer and you're going to put those first words down? What's going on for you, and how much did you get down the first time you sat? And when was that, by the way?
When I first started to write, because a lot of people encouraged me to write, I thought, okay, so I had an old laptop, and I started writing, and I couldn't put it down.
You had a laptop or your handwritten?
I used to write it with my hand, but sometimes I couldn't read my own handwriting, and so
we all have that problem.
So I thought, what? For me to read, I must write it on, But you're right. For me, I'm still old school. And if I want to write something that's going to have an impact, whether on me or on others, I handwrite. And then I go back to my laptop. So when I started to actually put it on the laptop, I thought, this is becoming real. And so the more I wrote, the more I started to download, because it was stuffed.
Oh yeah.
And as I started to write, I actually visually and in my mind, I went back to those spots.
What was going on for you? Were you by yourself? Were the kids at home?
I was by myself, and there were many hours of weeping.
I was going to say.
And less writing. But you know what, Candace, when I would write a particular scene and I would weep and go through all the emotions of anger and hate and wanting vengeance, once I dealt with it, I didn't have to go back. Even if I had to rewrite the scene, it wasn't as difficult.
You put yourself through therapy.
I did.
You put it out on the table and looked at it.
Yeah. I faced my demons.
Mm-hmm.
And once I wrote the whole thing, it was a draft really, I just got really frustrated with myself.
Why?
I just thought, you know what? First of all, who's going to read my book? Who's going to want to hear a sad story of this woman? And then, who is this book for?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of questions, and there were community leaders that also discouraged me.
Really?
Yeah.
What was that all about? Why do you think that was?
Especially in my community, the people would say, well, how much of the culture are you exposing? Well, be careful how much you write.
Wow.
And so,
Fear.
yeah, so they started to say those things, and I thought, and then one man said, you're going to be sued, and you'll be sued big time. And I'm thinking, I have nothing to be sued for. And so all those negatives that came in, and you know what I did? I opened the document up and I deleted it.
Oh, no.
I deleted.
And so how long into that writing process did you delete? How much had you worked at it before you deleted it all?
Probably a couple of years.
Really?
Yeah, a couple of years of writing, and I was actually quite proud of myself in saying, you know, I wrote it, only to go to the leaders, to several community members and say, you know, I've written it, because I had no idea how to publish
Mm-hmm.
and how to write even a draft. I remember asking you one time.
Yeah.
And there's people, before even giving me any hope, they just cut me off, and they said, they destroyed my dream.
What do you think what was their motive? Or what was behind their?
I think, first of all, I was a woman, now writing about a woman's story, and in their mind they thought I was putting men down. Then second is I was labeling the culture, and third is they didn't want to face the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And this book really isn't about putting men down or putting a culture down. It's exposing the ugliness. Because I know there are men that are abused as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are fathers that are grieving for their daughters.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no help.
Mm-hmm.
So then
What made you change? So obviously you still had that sensitivity, as we all do, even without experiencing that kind of violence. That's a basic hook in every human being, is when someone puts out and says to you, you're taking a big risk, and then project their fears upon
That's
you,
right.
then you find there's a little bit of fear still inside you, and then that's probably what caused you to delete it, is responding to their fear.
That's right.
What then, how long did it take you to make a different decision to make this a reality?
Well, after I deleted it, my children and I, we just went away. We went away for a week, and I came back, and the evening news was just about to come on, and I came down really frustrated with God, like, why did you put me through all this? And now,
With everything.
Yeah. And so I turned on the news, and the first story was another Indo-Canadian woman found dead. And I thought, what does another mean? So I went back and I Googled, how many murders, and there were at least 3 prior to that. There were a series of young women, professional women, who were being killed by their husbands. And I just felt like, okay, I cheated death. I somehow survived. What about this women?
Mm-hmm.
They could not. So I'm going to write again. I'm going to write for women like those women and give them hope.
So you found in those stories, in that moment, the courage to face fears, because it's not fear that stops us. It's not finding the courage to deal with that fear, because we're always going to have fear.
There's always some kind of fear in us, right? And so, I had to find a reason to deal with my fear.
That was greater than the fear.
That's right.
And greater than their voices.
Yes.
And maybe perhaps they did you a favor by vocalizing those fears. It brought to the surface maybe that one little weak link in your chain that would have stopped you.
That's exactly true, because up until this time I had a fear of men.
Wow.
And I had a fear of authority.
Interesting.
And I thought, And if you ask me that question today, are you still afraid of those men? Are you still afraid of what they may think? Not at all.
But that's amazing, and that's what I think, as unfortunate as it was that those people vocalized those things to you, they were speaking about the very core of the fear that people have
Or
around
their
these
own
issues.
fear. It could
Yeah.
have been,
Yeah, it was totally,
Yeah.
they represented everything
Yeah.
that why this kind of behavior stays locked in the first place.
That's right. And, if I dealt with them, maybe there was something in there that they were hiding.
That's it. Or that, their own fears. They hadn't come to grips with understanding
Yeah.
it, the fear of the unknown or
Yeah.
exposure,
Yeah.
lack of transparency.
Yeah, exactly.
So in some ways, I know it was probably frustrating, but when you get pushback on doing something, then and you respond to that pushback and go back into that fear place, it's almost like that's not quite finished for me yet. And then to realize their negative response is actually pushed to the surface.
That's so right.
What was finished what was not quite finished.
Actually,
in
they
you.
made me healthier,
Yeah.
and they made me stronger.
Because had you have still continued to have that fear of man, I mean, every author knows this, and certainly we have over the years. I mean, the great talk show person that we all know, Oprah, has exposed through her willingness to be vulnerable,
That's right.
has exposed the amount of fears over the years that have stopped people from functioning. We've seen that in a really public way, and here, that's what happened to you. You had to address it. You were forced to.
Yeah.
So then, so now a week goes by, and you make this. You have this conviction now that's taken you beyond your fear,
Yeah.
and the fear that may have shown up later on had you have published it
Yeah.
without dealing with that fear.
That's true. You know what? They did me a huge favor. And now, fast forwarding, say, a week later, and hearing about all these women who lost their lives, I just thought, I gotta do it. I gotta face my demons, and I gotta deal with my insecurities
There you go.
and move on. And so I did. I had my own way of dealing it by praying, by not writing the book again, but what was holding me back. And so I started to write that, the pros and cons, what held me and what would benefit if I did go ahead and write it. And, the desire to help other victims was so much greater than the fear. And I wrote, and within 6 months, I finished it.
So that obviously is very clear. That I love what you say when you said that you had to first analyze within you the process of what was stopping you. And that is really digging out the root and removing barriers so that you could write in freedom and honesty.
Exactly.
What made you, because a lot of women don't do that, they don't go that far, they don't go that deep. And why was it that you went that deep in yourself? What drove you to do that? What were your thinking processes that made you do that?
There were years and years and years of stuffed emotions that I wasn't allowed to show, verbalize, or react. So I completely was numb. Now, in order for me to be transparent when I'm writing that, or be able to give another woman hope, when I haven't had any, I would be a liar. So I had to go deep down, even if it hurt. It hurt big time. But I needed to go and face the fear of sleeping outside at night, being tired. I had to face the fear that I could be killed. I had to face the fear that my children may once again lose their mom. So all those things, and then I thought, you know what? This is no kind of living. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. So I am gonna just go ahead and do the best, even if one person is impacted by this book, it's worth it. And that's when I came out of my own shell, and I said, I'm facing it, and I'm doing it. And throughout the process, again rewriting, it was again therapeutic, because there were some hidden issues that I hadn't dealt with or didn't want to deal with, and that came out.
When you say, I mean, my mind is just racing with so much stuff that I want to ask you around that. When you say that your mind didn't want to deal with it, it was because what? I mean, we might think that's obvious.
I was abused to the point where dying would have brought me relief. And now to be thrown in the world with nothing really. I thought, how am I going to do it? How am I going to face? And so, a lot of self-talk, um, counseling, a lot of counseling, and just surrounding myself with positives. No longer somebody saying, you can't do it. You're going to be sued, or you're going this and that and that. Yeah, I had friends who would say, Kamal, you need to be careful, but let's do this and this, let's research. So I did a lot of self-talk, I would be up late night talking.
What I find really interesting is if I were to ask you this question, the woman that you are today and the young woman that got involved in this situation, did you have this kind of courage when you were a young girl?
No, not at all. You know, I just came back from Winnipeg, and one of the girls that spoke in the break, she said, my husband put me through all of this. And I just want to thank my husband for making me this strong. And, that's exactly my words is, I want to thank the situations that I had to overcome, because had I not, I'd still be that scared little girl. But I am now seeing how strong I've become. And yeah, it was because of him.
You know, it's so interesting because I know that there's people that are right in the middle of their hurt that haven't processed this yet, and maybe experts that would be watching this. And you know what I suspect the first thing they would say is, and I think that I'm going to say it and then we'll sort of analyze it, is that are you suggesting, Kamal, that it takes a violent abuse for you to learn courage and to become a courageous person? Are you suggesting that women have to go through this in order to find their courage? I know that's not what you're saying. I know that's not what I would say. Can you address that? Because I know that that's where people's mind goes to, especially if they're still feeling vulnerable and weak.
That's right. Situations, no matter what situation you're in, that situation can either break you or make you. I wish that none of the women or victims go through what I went through. However, for me, like I said earlier, it was either die or live a life of bondage. And now that I've come out of it, I had a choice again. Either I be a victim all my life, or I bounce out of it, come out of it, and come out of it strong. And so the lessons that I learned, because I came from a very strict background, I wasn't allowed to date, I never could go to the mall alone, so we were just so sheltered.
Protected.
Right. And so for me to be now in this marriage, I knew nothing but to be a subservient wife. And if he said, drink poison, I did. And if I was going to die, I let it, said, okay, I'll die. Kill me quickly. Until I thought, no, I don't want to die. Look at my beautiful 4 children. Am I going to leave my 2 girls at his mercy? And so that they can become his next victims? So because of my own situation and a lot of fighting emotionally and telling myself, you can't let him take over. And so as I started to, for instance, the nights that I would spend outside, it would be cold, it would be dark, it was scary. So I would next day, when he wasn't looking, put a small blanket, one of the children's blankets outside, in the garbage bag, so it looked like a garbage. So if I was sent out, after a while, I would take that and cover myself. So I started to think one step ahead of
You
him.
started to become a survivor in a war-torn environment. So your brain became hyper alert to being sensitive to the circumstances around you. I'm really curious, if I was in your head, what would I see you saying to yourself when he's asking you to do things to destroy yourself and you're cooperating with that? What is that mind that's going on inside of you? Because I'm pretty sure that women listening to this want to know, what is it? Because always it's like, how could somebody do that? We know better. That's not true. What is the dialogue that's keeping you there? And what's missing here
Yeah.
that would do that.
Yeah, because your head and your heart don't
No.
go together.
No, they're not talking.
Yeah, you know, your heart wants to say this, oh, poor thing, but your head is saying something else. And so when he would offer, say, Lysol for me to drink, or when he would point to the kerosene gallon and, you know, pour it, what my mind would say is, can somehow this kerosene go on him? Can I somehow be strong enough to grab it from him and pour it on him instead of him pouring it on me? Would he somehow light it and burn himself?
Oh, so now you're in survivor mode.
That's right.
So
And
now it's a strategy, even if it's a crazy strategy. You're living in a crazy situation, so there's no sanity
No.
about trying to come up with the same strategy
No,
when
because-
someone's suggesting that they're
yeah,
going to pour
because if you're
kerosene.
cornered in a room, you know you have no escape.
Right.
So in your mind, you just start to think something magical could happen right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe, you know, one of the things I write in my book about Wonder Woman, thinking,
Mhm.
if I could just turn into this Wonder Woman, if I could, just as much as, you know, it's evil thinking, but you know what? No one thinks good thoughts at the time.
Yeah.
If his arm would just paralyze
Right.
and the gallon wouldn't even move, or if he just had a stroke.
But that's not evil thinking. That's you really trying to survive. The evil is what's happening right there. And your response is a survival response to incredible circumstances that nobody should be subjected to.
Yeah. See, I never wanted him dead. I never. But I
don't
did.
know that I wouldn't have wanted somebody,
But
like,
you know
on
what?
honesty.
Right.
it's-
But you know what I wanted him? I wanted him totally paralyzed. I wanted him to depend on me now.
You wanted to shift power.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is in itself is natural that you're trying to shift the power in it, but it's equally wrong, because if he was wrong to empower you, you're wrong to empower him.
Yeah.
And yet it's the natural response to
And
what's
it's a
going on.
survivor response. You know, I don't want to die. If I wanted to, I would have just killed myself.
Mhm.
But I went through years of abuse and torture because I wanted to live. There was a part of me that said, Kamal, don't give up. You know, don't give up, because then it's going to be too easy for him.
Mhm.
And by, you know, a number of years into the marriage, I began to hate him.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
anger.
Yeah, it was that. What
I'm
he-
surprised it took you that long
It did take me that long because
to
I'm
hate
thinking,
him.
because you know what? Before that, you're brainwashed.
Mhm.
It's your fault. You can't never do anything right. See, your parents didn't want you, so they dumped you.
And what was that peace inside of you that you obviously have now? And when I mean peace, I mean PIECE. What was that peace inside of you that made that information okay with you? Because I know I can attribute my own issues to being young. I didn't have physical violence after I was an adult. I had emotional and some spiritual issues that I had to deal with, mostly centered around religion. But, and it certainly doesn't even touch the magnitude of what you went through. But I also found myself asking myself, doubting my own intelligence and finding that my circumstances manifested my doubt. And so, did you have that contradiction, or was there absolutely just a flat blanket of, there wasn't even an awareness that you were doubting yourself, or were you aware that you were
You know,
doubting
there were
yourself?
bits and pieces, you know, that would be kind of thrown out at me when I would see another girl my age, sort of the same background, and I'm thinking, why is she happy? Who's supporting her?
You had something that made you
Yeah.
compare.
Yeah, my sisters, I would think, why are they happy? We come from the same mother and father. We had the same upbringing. They married the same culture. What's different? My culture didn't promote that with these other four sisters. So what's wrong with me? So is there something?
What
wrong
is
with
the answer to that? Because that's exactly what somebody would do. Why am I the only one? And
Yeah.
you would immediately look inward, self-examine, and of course you're going to find all kinds of stuff in there. What is the answer to that? Why you? If your sisters weren't suffering
Yeah.
that way, why you?
Why me? And I asked that question, you know, in that time. Why me? You know, I was told I was very pretty. You know, my sister sometimes didn't like me for that comment. I was, you know, like very vocal with my parents, why, I wanted to know everything. And then I bragged that I married a prince, that I married one of the wealthiest family, that, you know, you guys just have to work, I don't have to. You know, I had all this bragging rights. And then what? And so I wasn't allowed to watch TV, because we're in my side of the unit, there was none. And so, you know, I started reading my children's books, where it said, you know, about Cinderella, about this, and I thought, oh, I'm the Cinderella. Then I thought, I know I'm not all that he's saying, that I'm not ugly, that I'm not worthless, I'm not the useless, you know, bitch that he called me. And I would look at him and I'd think, and who are you? In my mind, I would ask, who are you? You a dirty, filthy man who smokes all day and all night and beats the crap out of a vulnerable girl. And as the more I despised him in my heart and in my head, the more I felt empowered. Because now that I had a reason to live, because I wanted to show him.
And it doesn't really matter where that source of energy came from, because it's better for you to be alive and angry than dead and passive. And that, to me, I don't find any fault with those feelings, because they were necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't ask for that. They weren't imposed on you. You didn't have this happen to you because you were pretty and because you had a bit of an insulated life and because you married into a wealthy family. This happened to you because of one reason, because there was a human being who was damaged.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. You didn't cause it, you didn't create it.
But see, at the time you don't know, because all you know is this, he's your life and he controls it. And so as I look back, and you put it so well, that he's the one who had the problem. And I didn't ask for it. You know, when I signed that marriage contract, I didn't say, you can do all these things.
Right, because even in surgery, we get informed consent. If you take this procedure, you know, you could have this, and well, you certainly know you've had your share of surgeries, and you could possibly die. If that was in a marriage contract, I'd be looking at that going, okay, let me see if I want to do that.
And I talk about it, and I said the only lines in that marriage contract that he remembers is, till death do us part. You know, and he took that very seriously, where he thought death should come quickly. You know. And so when he started to say to me, commit suicide, die, if you love me. And I did not love him when he started suggesting that. I said, well, you love the children, don't you? No question. What mother would say, no, not really. And he bought my silence because of my children. And so when he started to suggest that I kill myself for the insurance money, I thought, okay, if it's that easy, why don't you die?
There you go.
You know, if you're suggesting it to me because you want a good life, you don't have a good life, you might not have a good life. You know, why don't you? But I never said it, I thought it.
But still, that gave you some sanity to stop you from pulling yourself down into this spiral of insecurity and self-blame and self-doubt. You know what I find really interesting, and I'm sure you now know this, standing back and reading your own story and, you know, speaking to so many women and over the years, your story represents not an individual guy, but anyone who is that damaged and broken. Because it's I think one of the toughest things I've ever had to say, I've been asked to speak to a few domestic violence groups, and one of the hardest pieces of information to get through to those women, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's emotional alienation in a relationship, it really doesn't matter what it is to look at them and say, do you really believe that this is personal? Do you really think that he would just target you?
Yeah.
That you were the only person he would ever do this to?
You know, what's interesting is when I was just finishing this book and thinking, who's my target audience? And is it just a small group of women? And then I had a vision. And in my vision, there's this man. And this man is beating up his wife. And so somehow this wife is empowered. She gets the help. She's out. He gets another one. Does the same thing. And then she gets out. And then I saw that it's a pattern. What is the root?
Yes.
You know, and so
where's the toxicity coming
from?
So I'm not saying that this at all would be comparing a minor issue with a larger issue, But the bottom line is that every one of us in this planet are dealing with the two facets of our nature. And I'm not excusing his conduct or his behavior. But let's say he had a moment of lucidity, a sane moment. And he truly did have that sane moment. That, to me, is when he gets informed consent. Do you realize and understand, Mr., that in this moment, or Mrs., because we're going to talk about female domestic violence in a second, because I would love to talk to you about that, because I don't think it's something that gets spoken to very frequently. But in that moment, and he's actually saying, and he's like realizing that it's him conducting himself that way, that this behavior is coming out of him.
There was one time when we were back at his parents' house in India. He had gone downstairs, and it was, I guess, in the evening, so all the stores were closed. A bunch of men came up to him and picked a fight. So he didn't want to fight, and so they continued to pick and pick, and they said, "Be a man now. If you can beat up your wife, come fight." And he said no, and he walked away. But then he came and beat me up, thinking I'd put them up to it. And so he knew exactly what he was doing, because he was a coward, And I said it to him after we separated, and he would call me, and I said, "Tell me something. The way you beat me up and treated me, would you treat a man equal your age, your size, your weight, everything? Would you? Can you? Or would you be too coward?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "You deserved it, because I was disciplining."
Well, he had to justify his conduct.
Of course. So I knew he had sane moments. I knew that what he was doing, because he would plan it. Mm-hmm. He would plan it all day, and then come up with new things.
And yet his behavior is insane.
Yeah,
that's not a normal behavior. So whatever his
dual
lucid moments
personality.
were, his lucid moments.
Yeah.
So in I guess the big thing for all of us is we try to explain evil. We try to explain wrong because we can't. It hurts and it doesn't make sense to our intelligent mind. So we're always looking for reasons. And I always find it difficult when I hear society just end up, people are just bad or people are just evil. But I always think, unless there's, brain damage or there's a true mental illness or there's something missing from the brain, there has to be an explanation somehow in our society for the conduct of people. But I think that in your situation, women especially end up defaulting to themselves. They do blame themselves for it, and that is a unfortunate diversion, because the more that they blame themselves, the less they can see clearly. And what's happening is it's a constant shift in power. Either he's totally wrong or I'm totally wrong. He's totally wrong or I'm totally wrong. Neither of them are a balanced perspective. What's going on is to be able to, in fact, I had a situation recently, and you'll appreciate this, where I had a situation with somebody that was violating some boundaries that I had put in place. And for myself, not putting boundaries on them, but for what was okay with me. And this person had some personal work that they had not done in their life. Mm-hmm. And when I challenged them on the fact that they were impeding into affecting my personal life and that it needed to be changed, it was a phone call saying, "We need to discuss this is going on." The person got incredibly defensive and said, "Nobody's going to speak to me like that." And it was very interesting because I had to step away from that conversation for about a week. And I had to think about that. And in my thinking process, I thought to myself, wait a minute. They're absolutely right that nobody should speak to them with the sternness that I was speaking when I was telling them that they were violating my boundaries. But then this little voice came to me and said, "Just a minute. What? Were they acknowledging that they had violated your boundaries?" No. They were so offended by me pointing out to them where they were affecting me. But even now, years later, I haven't even experienced what you've experienced. I could still see that I needed to level that playing field out going. And I ended up having a good conversation with that individual, saying to them, "You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. You have the right to determine how you're going to be spoken to. And I equally have the right to ensure I am safe and my boundaries are safe." And that, on that level playing field, we've got to move forward in that mutual respect. And I saw that person, their eyes lit up, and because I was now having a face-to-face with them, and it was a revelation for them. Like, you're right.
There's two sides to the dysfunction. You know,
Yeah.
the victim thinks she's the dysfunction one, and we know that the other person is. But you know, there's this brainwashing. There's this hopelessness. Now what? You know, and a lot of women come into the marriage for the marriage to stay. And I know
That's
culture.
the hook, right?
That's the hook. And my parents, and I know a lot of parents, when they give their daughter away in marriage, they say, "Now this is no longer your home."
So there's no.
So
it's their way of, in their functional brain, think it's their way of not interfering with the new marriage and letting it continue.
Yeah, like, we wish you well, it's gonna be well, and now, you know, you come back as a guest, and so there's, you know, I know I was totally dysfunctional in my thinking, because no one else told me the other, and so when I would think, "Am I ugly?" Part of me would think, "Oh yeah, you know, he broke my nose, so it's, you know, this. Oh yeah, my this, you know," and so there was always something, and you know, I thought, I don't care if I'm ugly, I don't care if I'm poor, I don't care if my face is deformed, I still have a life, and I still have to live, and so I needed to, all those twisted thinking pattern in me of my own self, I needed to get rid of that.
And that's a lot of work. And how do you do that when you're in the midst of survival all the time in a war zone? It's like, it's very difficult, and that's why getting out is absolutely essential. Because even in a special education, and I'm certainly no expert in this, but even in applied behavior analysis, the ABA process of dealing with autistic children, one of the magical things, I'm not an expert in this either, so I don't want anybody challenging me. I'm just giving you all the little bit that I have, which is you bring the behavior under control so that learning can take place. It is impossible to learn if you are in a survival state.
No, you cannot. And that's why, after all these years, had that ocean scene not happened, had that rape not happened in front of my son, it almost like it stabbed me to wake up. And I felt like a dagger going in and out.
How deep did it have to go to wake you up?
It had to go deep, deep, because you know, there's always two sides to a victim. He was also a victim in whatever he was caught in, and I thought, we are one dysfunctional family. Do I like being beaten up? While my sister-in-laws are enjoying going on their own personal, you know, charter plane here and there, I'm a prisoner, and I've made my home a prison by allowing him. How long will I allow this monster to push me in that ocean, to sodomize me, to hang me, to burn me with his cigarettes while he's laughing at me? Am I that useless that I can't make it on my own? So I started, those few situations that happened night after night, I thought, no, I'm not going to be here. Even if I have to run away with another man, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter, because you've got to get out.
Yeah.
And I'm not justifying and saying that that's the best way, because it's got nothing to do with loyalty.
Yeah.
It has to do with survival.
Yeah. And that was my only way out, was to run.
And to find a safe way to run, no matter what that looked like.
That's right. Because being caught and brought back would have been even worse.
So you're the expert here on this, because I experienced childhood domestic violence is very different than what you did. It has its own issues. And my mother found the courage to get out when I was, 11 and a half, or 11, I think. So, that's a different story. But do you think part of the reason that I think corporations get frustrated in dealing with issues of domestic violence is that it's like putting money into a bucket with a hole in it, because these women are going to keep coming back and back and back. As you were talking, I'm wondering, and I don't know the answer to this because you're the expert, the amount of times that the violence happens, do you think that you create a numbness to try to survive with it, and that's why it takes such a dramatic event to wake you up?
Yeah. In order to survive, you have to do something. You have to tell your body something. And what I kept telling my body is, go numb. Don't feel. Because, a look, from somebody's bad enough. That scars you. To be told you should kill yourself, you're worthless, and then take a belt out and swing it, or some of the other things that I described earlier. How do you carry on? And so somehow in part of my brain we connected, and I told it to block out my pain. And so I started to block out. I had crushed knuckles because I was holding on to this metal rail in the ocean. I was hung, slaps. I have an artificial jaw. For me to wake up the next morning after an hour's sleep, I could not take care of my 4 children, be functional, and still hope one day it'll stop. So I blocked it for a number of years. I started to unblock and let my body feel pain when I actually left it.
Isn't it interesting that the very technique you had to use to stop the pain was the very technique keeping you there?
Yeah.
Because of the numbness. And that's that cycle that we put ourselves in, that the circumstances put ourselves in. When I listen to you and I recall those scenes, it brings tears to my eyes because I can imagine the loneliness, and I wouldn't be human if I couldn't feel what you were going through. One of the issues that I don't think is ever discussed is domestic violence performed by females. And it's not talked about very much. And domestic violence from females, I see it. I've seen qualities in myself where I feel powerless in an emotional situation, where I've got a passive partner. Maybe there's other women out there whose partners have been passive. They want them to respond. They don't know how to get it. And so they revert to the same types of behaviors, but because there's a physical difference, it's more psychological, mental, and emotional, because a woman's not going to have that kind of physical power over a man, because at some point he's strong and he's going to fight back.
It's a lot of words and mental and even financial. I've talked to a lot of men's groups, and a few men have come up to me or have written to me and said, most of what you described was me.
Wow.
And I would write back and say, well, is there help for you? Would you consider leaving? And do what? That's the question. Who would I go to? One man clearly wrote, he said, actually spoke to me and said, I finally went to her mom and said, look at the scratches on my face. She digs her nails and just does this. She was physically abusing him too. And the mother laughed at him and said, when the cat's doing that, don't blame my daughter. What man gets abused? Look at my tiny daughter and look at you. And he said, I stopped telling anybody because it was embarrassing. I have a position in my company. I have a position in my temple. How am I going to lose that?
And what is the perception of people when they see a man being abused? They say he's weak.
Yeah.
But that's not true.
No, not at all.
He is actually controlling himself because he has the physical strength to stop it, but he doesn't out of decency. And a dysfunctional woman doesn't see that as decent.
No.
She sees it as the weakness.
Weak, yeah,
that
exactly.
she is the same way a man looks at a woman who doesn't fight back and says, oh, you're just weak, you're just taking this from me. He's misunderstanding that this is a decent person who wouldn't dream of doing
But
that.
deep down, they do not like it. They're hoping it'll stop. See, none of us like being in that situation.
Nobody.
Why we stay is many reasons. But, ask me today, so what did you think? If I had to go through that one time and it's done, I'm out of there. But circumstances, left me there. I was abandoned by many that's supposed to have been there to protect me, abandoned me, allowed this abuse to continue. So when you talk about female to female or female to male, I was abused by female. I was not just abused in a mental, psychological way. I was abused physically by my mother-in-law, who, if my husband didn't beat me up, she would take over. She broke a wooden spoon on my head. She encouraged him to kill me, which is an easy thing to do.
Are they alive today?
No, that she died some years ago, but I did talk to her about it.
Did you? And what did she have before? I'm not that you need this, because so many survivors don't get the chance to go back and say to someone, this is what you did. The work of forgiveness and releasing self is self. There is no one that can be part of that process, because
It's between me and the person, or me and God.
yeah, because if that person can't own it, then you're trapped forever hoping that they will own it.
Yeah. Just like my husband, whenever he would call or find us and beg me to come back to him, I would bring it up. Why did you do this?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know I have this because of you? A broken job because of you, or bad back. Well, see, I was disciplining you.
Oh boy.
So I knew that I could never reason with him. However, I did forgive him at his funeral. But for my mother-in-law, she came for her daughter's funeral. And I had forgiven her daughter hours before she died. And she asked for my forgiveness. And so I had about an hour to talk to her mom and comfort her. And I said to her, what you're going through today, a loss, is what I've experienced many times. Loss of mobility, loss of livelihood, loss of children. I said, do you know what I went through? You didn't make it easy for me. She said, yeah, I look back and I think my son was wrong. And all I said to her is, we can go on blaming, but I want to stop here and say, I'm very strong. You've allowed me through all of this to be very courageous and to dream. And I've started dreaming. And I said, one day I will write, and I will let the world know my story. Not to punish you, but to let people know that even if they're in the hell, there is hope. And so she was very angry at me for her wanting to write. But as she left my house, I said, I forgive you, Mom. Whether you accept it or not, I'm doing it for myself.
Because forgiveness says, I'm releasing you from the impact you're having on my life.
Yeah.
Because as gracious as I am, I need to free myself from the trap of keeping you
Still controlling me.
First and foremost of my brain. Even if you're not trying to control me, it's just your dysfunction. The more I give space to you, the more it keeps happening.
Because what was happening was every night I would go to bed and think, oh, my head hurts, the whole day's event has worn me down, besides the pain and suffering and all this medication and this ongoing surgeries. And I would think, I hate them. I hate them. I wish bad things would happen to them. And wake up and think, are my children alive? Did they get into my home? And so first thing you do is rush into their rooms. Oh, okay. So what's going to happen throughout the day? Will he find me? Will they find me? So they were
living through you constantly.
And in me.
And you needed to get that out. And I think people misunderstand forgiveness.
Yeah.
They think you're saying, well, I forgive you means what you did was okay.
Yeah.
You're not. You're saying, I can't let you live in me and take
Still
away
ownership.
and the quality of my life. I have to say, you can't.
Yeah.
The dysfunction can't be welcome here.
No, because forgiveness doesn't mean you excuse his behavior.
No.
It's
It's for
just-
you. It's
yeah.
not for them.
Yeah, exactly.
And people hate that.
Yeah,
because they really think it's, letting people get away with stuff. But
Yes, I've talked endless times on my abuse and all that, and then I end with a message of forgiveness, and I'll have people in the audience say, "That's not for me." And I said, you know what? You're robbing your dream. You're robbing what potential you have in you to make a difference, because you're so caught up in wanting vengeance, hating him.
And he gets to come into your every conversation, or her, or the incident.
Yeah.
It could be anything, really, anything that's damaged us. A car accident, the accidental
Triggers,
death
right?
of a loved
Yeah.
one, by negligence in somebody else. It doesn't matter what it is the more that stays with us, the more we let it, give it a place in our lives
And then we
breathes and
feed
lives
it.
through us.
We start feeding it with the
Yeah.
situations you described. And for me, it was more me and my children. Would I now be my husband to them?
Right, because now you're bringing that into their todays and
Yes.
into their tomorrows.
That's right. And would they now take that and say it's okay and be bullies or victims?
Because they haven't processed it. How powerful. I know that people want to know how your kids are, how your family is, everything. And I don't want to take away from the importance of them reading this book, which is why I haven't let people see too much about what's inside here. The story is powerful. It is very well written for a girl that sure had never been a professional writer before. You certainly are a professional writer now.
Thank you.
The picture is amazing on the front of you standing in the place of your greatest fear and facing that.
Yeah. You know, this is the place where it would have taken my life from my children because they were, you know, several yards away from their stock,
Wow.
waiting either mom will come back or not come back. And here I am facing it saying, I'm going to live and not die.
Yeah. It's a beautiful picture. It's angelic. It's looking at the largest, biggest obstacle in your life and saying, I am not afraid of you.
That's right. Yeah.
When I saw that, and just in closing, I thought of The Life of Pi. Have you seen that movie?
Yes. In fact, when you told me, I was on the plane last week and I thought, I have to watch it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing story. So this book, Black and Blue Sari, S-A-R-I, the true story of a woman surviving and overcoming years of abuse, torture, and fear in her marriage. I think that on behalf of everybody that's challenged, I want to thank you for doing that work of going back into that place of courage, finding it, and then putting it down on paper and showing everybody that it's possible to put it down and not be a victim, but demonstrate that by exposing
That's right.
damage, we can become more intelligent. My reaction in the end was to say that any country, any society, any organization that tolerates this kind of behavior has forgotten what it means to be a human being.
That's right. That's right. And you know, this book is available in all the bookstores now.
Is it now? And so I can go to Chapters and find
Yes.
it? Oh, that's amazing. I really recommend that you purchase this book, not just because I think it's a great way to support Kamal and her purposes, but Kamal is also speaking everywhere on this issue and reaching cultures that maybe would not have the opportunity to be reached because it's still pretty silent and a lot of people don't want to talk about it. But please buy the book for your own sake, because I'm sure somebody in your life has either experienced a level of abuse in one way or another, or even unintended dysfunction. But in the end, she tells her story of forgiveness, which is a healthy, balanced perspective, and you also get to find out how her kids are doing today. Thanks, Kamal,